Welcome to MOOC's online portal. In today's topic under budgeting, we will have an introduction, objectives, type. We'll be talking about traditional budgeting, its strengths, limitations and criticism. And later we'll be talking about performance budgeting, its features, its evolution, advantages, limitation, a little bit of appraisal and then references, and we can check yourself. Budgeting is very important in the financial planning of any nation. Even for a company or even a family, budgeting is very important. What is actually a budgeting? It is nothing but a quantitative representation of a plan of action. Usually it is proposed by a management or the higher authority. It always has a time limit, usually it's planned for a year. It always assists in coordination and always aims to accomplish a plan for the organization or a government. What are the objectives of budgeting? Budgeting is the foundation of the management control process. It is basically an accounting tool used by all organizations to implement their strategies and plan of action. Budget normally gives a monetary value to all the plans and targets so that progress can be measured easily. Budget also outlines an organization's financial goals set for a particular year. Today we are going to discuss about two types of budgeting. One is the traditional budgeting and the other one is the performance budgeting. First, we will move on to the characteristics of traditional budgeting. As the name suggests, it is traditional, it is ancient in its character. It is a common sense that we always plan for the future based on what has been successful or what has worked well in the past. This concept, which believes in tradition, is always used when budgets are prepared. Applied formally, it is always called as traditional budgeting. It is a well-established method of forecasting cost and income. It is always based on previous year's figures. All the monetary figures are updated to include the next year's predicted sales, changed cost and expenditure. Traditional budgeting uses proven data and the existing knowledge of the past. It always uses the past income and the cost figures of the yesteryears. Traditional budgeting generates sensible projections of income and costs for the following year or the next year. Previous year's income and cost figures helps to identify the trends that affect the future income. It always adjusts the projections and ensures that plans are workable. It always looks for revenues and opportunities to save for the future. Not only that, it also identifies opportunities for cutting or reducing costs. Traditional budgeting, how do we understand or monitor the financial performance? There are 5 things involved. The first one is it aligns the budget with organization strategy, which means budgeting process is initiated at a very high level in the organization. It is part of an organization's strategic planning process. All the revenues and the expenditures are worked out. Strategy that is adopted is always similar to the previous year, and that is why it is traditional in its character. The second aspect of monitoring is to update last year's monetary figures. It always adjusts each item based on the changes that is expected in the coming year. What do we anticipate revenue for the next year? Where do we have to spend more? What are the new expenses that are associated for the current year? How do we provide for the cost of living wage adjustments? How do we implement or accept pay-related union agreements? Any other expenditure that needs to be reduced or even eliminated totally. The third aspect of traditional budgeting is the factors that related to the new initiatives. There could be new items to the budget based on the goals and needs. There could be a necessity for purchase of new equipments and expenditure involved. There could be more additional staff that is required, which will lead to staff salaries. There could be a new product or a service that needs to be added, which will require expenditure, or there could be a major project which require more financial resources. The fourth one is how to negotiate the budget. It is always desired that a budget will be very good, but it will always be challenged by a few others, and often most of the budgets are ambitious in nature. But in budget, the cost needs to be kept under control. A balance needs to be required. And finally, implementation of the budget. One has to track actual results against predictions. At a regular intervals, one is expected to analyze the budget, calculate the variances, and periodic performance appraisal and reports are required under traditional budgeting. Otherwise, financial performance will not be monitored perfectly. What are the strengths with regarding to traditional budgeting? They induce planning by aiding the management in setting realistic goals. Plans of specified actions are met by these goals. Endorse communication and coordination. They influence the results. Constant evaluation of the performance is periodically conducted. Budget is prepared properly and all tools for decision making. There is a great sense of motivation among the employees as the process and the actions are very, very clear under traditional budgeting. What are the limitations of traditional budgeting? It is very costly and time consuming to put together a traditional budget. It rarely focuses on strategies, and sometimes it can even contradict the goals to be achieved. There is a constraint with regarding to responsiveness in traditional budgeting. Often there is a barrier to change and even progress. Value addition in traditional budgeting is very, very minute. Focus is placed on the reduction of costs. Importance is never given to creation of value. Updates and development of the budgets are infrequent. Usually, these traditional budgets are updated only once in a year. Often, based guesswork and unsupported assumptions are rampant. Command and control are strengthened vertically, which is not the right spirit. Often, it is reactive rather than proactive. Traditional budgeting is very hesitant to modification and sometimes even unrealistic. So, it makes it hard for innovation, and creativity does not flourish under traditional budgeting. How do we evaluate? Traditional budgeting is unable to meet the demands of the current competitive environment. It takes a significant amount of time to prepare and agree upon. It lacks flexibility and can also stifle flexibility. Traditional budgeting has a lock-in poor decision from previous years. Still, it is preferred by many leaders. Because traditional budgeting has not been able to meet most of the demand of a progressive organization, we have moved into performance budgeting. So here The objective of my lecture will be to explain the concept and objectives of performance budgeting. I shall describe the steps in performance budgeting, discuss the performance budgeting system that's happened in India, and even evaluate the performance budgeting system. What is performance budgeting? For any planned economy, budgeting becomes the important tool of management. Information for decision making, coordination, and evaluation is important. And of late, in most of the countries, we see a very significant increase in public expenditure. So the increase in public expenditure gives us two significant questions: how to control and regulate the increasing public expenditure. The second question is how to introduce efficiency into these public expenditures. After independence in India, the financial administration became more performance oriented, as we wanted an efficient government and an efficient administration. Budget, to be an efficient tool of plan implementation, had to go into some kind of a modification and change, and hence Government of India introduced performance budgeting system in India also. Now we move on to the general aspects of performance budgeting. What is it all about? It is a system of presentation of public expenditure. Performance budgeting reflects governmental output and also talk about the cost involved. The governmental operations as a process has a classification in terms of functions and programs. Performance budgeting through narrative statements and workload data in its process. It also indicates the work done, the proposed work to be done, and also the cost that is involved for the work to be done. Performance budgeting is an output oriented budget with information for a long range perspective. The purpose of government expenditure is more important than the object of expenditure under performance budgeting. It also defines the physical and the financial aspects. Performance budgeting establishes a relationship between the output and the input. It also involves the development of a very refined management structure. What does performance budgeting seek? It correlates the physical and the financial aspects of any program, improve the budget formulation, review, and the decision making process. It facilitates review by the legislature of any country. There is a possibility for more effective performance in terms of audit. It also measures progress towards long-term objectives and also brings annual budgets and developmental plans together. The components with regarding to performance budget. It's a program and activity classification that represent the range of work of each organization, a framework of specified objectives for each program, a stipulation of targets of work or achievement, a suitable workload factors, productivity and performance ratios that justify financial requirements of each program. There are 4 basic steps of performance budgeting. It establishes meaningful classification of public expenditure in terms of functions. The second step is to establish, improve and extend the activity of schedules of all activities of the government. Thirdly, establishment of work output, employee utilization, unit cost through objective methods. And lastly, creation of related cost and performance recording and a reporting system. What does the performance budgeting does or do? Performance budgeting facilitates. It is compelled to think of future activities not merely in terms of financial plans, but in terms of result, work assignment, and organizational responsibilities. Functional integration of thinking and doing process. It meets the short-term, medium-term, and the long-term plans. Involve formulation of schemes, laying down of targets, measuring the financial cost and the benefit for the organization or the government. Commencing point of performance budgeting and in the budgetary process is the allocation of resources. Under the allocation of resources, commitment to achievement and the awareness of accountability is stressed, minimizes the dislocational effect of cuts and ensures better identification of their impact. The resource allocation or the allocation of resources is followed by budget execution. Resource allocation has certain managerial considerations. The first one is communication of grants. Second one is ensure the initiation of action to implement schemes. Third one, it oversees the regular flow of expenditure. Fourthly, prevent cost overrun. And fifthly, it's a time-phased plan for expenditure and work. The last stage is appraisal and evaluation. How did we adopt or how did the performance budgeting start in India? India, after independence, felt the need for performance budgeting as against traditional budgeting because of three important aspects. The first one is scarcity of resource. With a huge population like India, socio-economic challenges like poverty, malnutrition, inequality was rampant. So we need to resource it very, very effectively, and we needed an efficient execution. The second important aspect is the accountability, which means how do we achieve the goals, ensuring accountability. And the last one is the feedback, which allows anything to be monitored and evaluate every program. With regarding to history, the first study was done with regarding to performance budgeting by Dean Appleby in the year 1953. The Estimates Committee of the Lok Sabha in its 20th report suggested that we could move towards performance budgeting in India. The 73rd report of the Estimate Committee also raised this issue again. The Union Finance Ministry also submitted a document known as Performance Budget of Selected Organization in the year 1968-69. And finally, the Government of India, on the recommendations of the Finance Commission, adopted the performance budgeting with effect from 1973-74 financial year. What are the advantages of performance budgeting? It improves the legislative review of all the departments and agencies of the government. It's an organic integration of the process of planning and budgeting. It improves public relations by providing clear information for a rational public appraisal. Efficiency of the system of information and communication enhances the quality of decision making. Functional classification integrates the process of planning, programming and budgeting, and finally brings the financial and physical aspects together. The limitations are, in practice, it may not be possible to have a well-organized categories, which means government will work into functions, programs and activities. Classifications normally do not reveal significant activities of the governmental departments and may not serve as a basis for budgetary decisions. Technique focuses only on the quantitative rather than qualitative evaluation. The process of cost estimates over program element is also very difficult. It aids but does not solve the greatest problem in budget decision making. As a conclusion, I want to reiterate, it is designed to performance budgeting depends largely on the skill of the tool maker. Efficacy of its application depends on the skill, imagination, energy and strength of the purpose of the user. Basis for administrative planning, executive coordination. As a conclusion, performance budgeting presents the public expenditure in terms of functions and program. It reflects the government output and its cost. It is designed to serve the purposes of long-range planning. Performance budgeting is a tool that depends largely on the skill of the tool maker. Efficacy of its application depends on the skill, imagination, energy, and strength of the purpose of the user. Basis for administrative planning, executive coordination, legislative scrutiny, and administrative accountability at all levels of government. The key words that to be remembered with regarding to performance budgeting: cost benefit analysis, financial requirement table, performance budgeting, performance audit, and work measurements. These are the references that are given for further study. A book by William with regarding the handbook on budgeting, Premchand on performance budgeting, Thavaraj on budgeting in India, Mathur on the management of government, United Nations publications, and it's a manual on budgeting, and Indian financial system by Bharati. You could even check yourself to know how much you know about performance budgeting. These questions could be answered. Explain the concept of performance budgeting, list the objective of performance budgeting, and even describe the process involved performance budgeting. Thank you.